Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about ordering real numbers. So let's start with some definitions. Least to greatest, that means smallest to largest. And on a number line, that means we're going to be going from left to right. Greatest to least means that we're going from the largest number to the smallest number. And on a number line, that looks from right to left. So now let's go ahead and take a look at a few examples. So here we are at example A, and it says place the following numbers in order from greatest to least. So we have a small problem here in the fact that all of our numbers are different types of numbers. We've got a fraction, we've got a scientific notation, we've got exponents, we've got percent, and we've got a regular decimal. So in order to compare these things, we're going to have them all looking the same, so we have a constant way of comparing them. So the easiest thing to turn them all into is decimals. So we're going to convert each number to a decimal in order to figure this out. Now the good news for us is that we can use our calculator to do some of this work for us. So we're going to take our 8 fifths and we can put that right in our Decimus calculator. And when we do that, we get 8 fifths is going to equal 1.6. And the calculator will do that for us. We don't have to do anything. We just show it, type in the fraction button with the a over b, put in 8 over 5, and it gives us 1.6. If we don't have our Decimus calculator, we can always divide the top by the bottom, and then that'll give us our answer. But since we do have our calculator, let's go ahead and use that. And we know that that's going to be 1.6. So we're going to write that down so we can keep track of it. Now we've got 2.5 times 10 to the negative first. Again, something we can type straight in our decimal calculator. When we do that, it's going to give us 0.25. So again, our calculator is going to help us out by immediately moving that to the decimal for us. Again, we can remember to move our decimal either one place to the left because we've got our negative 1, or we can multiply by 100, and that would get us there either way. But since we have our calculator, we're going to go ahead and use that, so we got 0.25. Now the next step here is we've got 8 to the 0 power. Hopefully I remember the trick that anything to the 0 power does equal 1, but if I've forgotten that, then I have my calculator. Go ahead and type that in, 8 to the 0 power, and I can see that that's 1. So anything to the 0 power is 1. We're going to keep track of that with writing down our answer here. So put down our 1, and then we can get rid of that one. Now, the last one is a little tricky, 18.5%. Now, we could do this one of two ways. We can either remember to move our decimal places 2 places to the left, and that's the easiest thing to do. I don't even need to take out my calculator. I could just go point and get 0.185. But if I've forgotten that trick, I can use my calculator, but it's a little trickier. So taking in my calculator here, I'm going to type in the number that I have, which is 18.5%, so 18.5. And then percent. When I type in the percent, however, it's going to give me percent of. And since we're looking at all of these as decimals, it's a percent of the number 1. So of the number 1, it's going to give me 0.185, which is what we found when we moved our decimal 2 places to the left. But that is a trick to use the calculator in case we've forgotten that. Now the last number there, negative 0.173, is already a decimal, so I don't need to do anything with that because it's already in decimal form. So now that I've got them all in decimals, I just need to put them in order from greatest to least. So before I even start there, I can see that I've got 4 positive numbers and 1 negative number. Since I've got 1 negative number, I know that one's going to be the least. So negative 0.173 is the number that's going to be the smallest, regardless of whatever the other numbers are. Now I need to compare the next numbers. I'm going to start with the biggest numbers. I see that this one's bigger than 1, smaller than 1, is 1, and smaller than 1. So there's only one number that's bigger than 1, and that's 1.6, so that's going to be 8 fifths. The next number that we said is going to be 1, so 8 times that to the 0 power. Then I needed to compare 0.25 and 0.18. So if I'm looking at their numbers, I've got a 2 here and I've got a 1 here. The 2 is bigger than the 1, so therefore I know that one's going to be next. So I've got 2.5 times 10 to the negative first, and then that leaves 18.5% to go in the last slot that we have available to us. Notice that when I wrote them down, I wrote them in original form. It doesn't say write down these decimal equivalents in order from greatest to least. It says write these numbers in order from greatest to least. So it's very, very important that you always write them in original form. Now let's go ahead and take a look at example B. Here we are at example B, and it says fill in the empty boxes so the numbers are in order from least to greatest. So this is the type of question that I would probably see if I were going to be taking a quiz or a standardized test. So I would probably be paying attention to how this problem is done. First it says fill the empty boxes, so the numbers from least to greatest, and it gave us 2 of the numbers. So we're going to try and figure out the numbers that fit in between those numbers to make this statement true. So the first thing that we need to do, as we learned in example A, since we have all these different type of numbers, is turn them all into decimals. But we don't just turn the numbers we have to pick from into decimals. We also have to turn the numbers that we have in the boxes already in decimals. That way we can compare them. So let's start with -7/8. So again, I can use my calculator. So I can bring in my calculator. I can type that straight in as a fraction. And if I do that, it tells me -0.875. Again, if I didn't have my fancy Desmos calculator, I could just divide the top by the bottom. That will work. But since I have my fancy dancy calculator, I'm going to be using it 0.875 so that we can keep track of that. I'm going to write it on top. The next number that we have to bring in is 8.5%. So again, I can move my decimal 2 places to the left, or if I've forgotten that trick, I can bring my calculator in. Type 8.5% of 1, and when I do that, it will tell me that it is 0.085. So again, I can keep track of that by writing it right on top. And now I need to start converting some of the other things that we have down at the bottom. So -2/3 is hopefully a fraction that we have memorized, but if it is not a fraction we have memorized, again, we can use our calculator, or we can type it in, -2 divided by 3, or we can bring in our Desmos calculator, -2 divided by 3. You can see that it says -0.666666 repeating, and then it has a 7 on the end. It only has a 7 there because it's run out of space to show us 6s. So it's not going to show us that it goes on forever and ever. It runs out of screen space. But hopefully we do know that that's -0.6 repeating, so we're going to write that right on top, -0.6 repeating. The next thing we have there is a scientific notation, -2.5 times 10 to the positive third. So this time we could be moving our decimal 3 places to the right. If we've forgotten to move our decimal 3 places to the right, we can bring in our Desmos calculator, type that straight in, -2.5 times 10 to the third, and we see that that is -2,500. Oh boy, I don't know that that one's going to fit anywhere on our number line over here, but -2,500. -0.2 is already a decimal. -0.92 is already a decimal, so don't have anything with that. The square root of 1, we could bring in our calculator for that, but the square root of 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. And then again, we can bring in our -16.5%, and either we can move our decimal 2 places to the left, like we know our trick to be, or if I've forgotten that, I can bring in my calculator for -16.5% of 1, and when I type that in, I get -0.165. So now that I have all of my numbers converted, let's see which ones are going to fit where. So I notice that I've got -0.875, and that's a negative number, and 0.085% is a positive number. So I've got to find some numbers that are between this negative and this very, very small positive. I also have to find the one number that's bigger than the positive number we have. So looking at my numbers down across the bottom, there's only one positive number. And since there's only one positive number, I know that's the one that has to be the bigger one and go into this box here. Since it's the only positive, it's the only available choice. So again, the square root of 1 is the one that's going to go in this box. -22,500 is way, 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 way more negative than -0.875. So we can eliminate that one immediately because we know it's nowhere near any of these numbers on this number line. It's going to end up somewhere over here. Now we're looking at -0.92, and I can see the 9 is going to be way, 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 way smaller than the 0.875. So if we were going along our number line, our 0.92 would be more negative than our 0.875. Again, it would end up somewhere over here in this ether zone. So the -0.92 is not a number that works for us either. That leaves us with -0.6 repeating and -1.65. So again, we have to figure out which one is more negative, and that will be the one that's closer to the -7/8. So since I have a -0.6, 6 is going to be bigger than this 1 in this case, which makes it more negative. So our -2/3 is going to be the one that comes closest to the -0.875, and then our -0.165 is a very, very small negative number. So our -16.5% is closest to the 0.85%. So notice I didn't do that by just taking the numbers that I thought might fit in there right away and trying to wedge them in. What I did first was eliminate things that I knew would not work, or eliminate things that I knew were the only possible choice. So the much better way to do this is eliminate the things I know that will be wrong or plug in the things I know that are 100% right, and that will hopefully narrow down my choices as opposed to trying to do all 5 choices at once. Now let's go ahead and take a look at example C. So here we are in example C. It says place the following numbers in order from greatest to least. So a few things that we notice about these 4 numbers. 1, we don't have any negative numbers. And 2, most of these numbers are over 1, right? None of them are really small decimals or anything in that manner. So we need to start by turning them all into decimals, as we talked about in the past. So 822 is not a decimal, but it's already in regular form. 822, while it doesn't have a decimal, is in a form we don't need to change. So the next thing we have is 850%. So again, type that into our calculator of 1. 850% of 1 is 8.5. So again, that's going to be bigger than 1, but as we can already tell, 8.5 probably going to be smaller than 822. So we can probably figure out that order already. Our next number is 1.3 times 10 to the positive third. Again, we can move our decimal places 3 places to the right, or we could use our calculator, type that right in. If we do that, 1.3 times 10 to the third gives us 1,300. So again, bigger than 1. And then our last number there is 1,600 thirds, which is the same as 1,600 divided by 3. So we could type in our calculator 1,600 divided by 3, or we could type it in as a fraction, 1,600 over 3. And either way, it's going to give us 533.3 repeating. So let's go ahead and record that. So now that we have all of our numbers written out, all we need to do now is place them in order. So we can see that 8.5 is probably going to be the one as our least, so we can start with that over on our least side. Now we've got a bunch of numbers that are really big, so 822, 1,300, 533.3. We can know that our biggest one out of those is 1,300, but again, we're going to write that in original form, so 1.3 times 10 to the third power. Oh, looks like we've made a mistake and did not write the first one in original form. So let's go ahead and erase that because we want to make sure that we have this 100% correct. Then we've got our 822, or our 1,600 over 3. Looks like 822 is bigger than 533 repeating, so 822 goes here, which leaves 1,600 over 3 for our number here. And we've got our order from greatest to least. That brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, go ahead and throw us a thumbs up. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will catch you in the next one.